A woman living in isolation receives a letter from her dead father, delivered by 5 strangers running for their lives. It reveals a terrifying debt. She is the target of fanatics who worship an ancient presence in a cursed mining town. To survive, she must journey into the heart of the nightmare, uncover her father's mad research, and find a way to kill something that feeds on human fear. A story of cosmic horror and redemption under the western sky. Subscribe and like for more tales from the edge of the map. The crossroads that marked the edge of the known world weren't just broken. They were forgotten. The signposts lay splintered in the dirt. The names of distant towns faded into ghosts of paint. Beyond them lay Ilara's domain, a vast silent expanse of grassland and sky where she answered to no one. She had built her life here, log by log, nail by nail, after leaving a past that felt like it belonged to another person entirely. Her father, a dreamer poisoned by wanderlust, had abandoned them when she was just a girl, chasing rumors of glory in the far west. He had died there, she'd been told years ago. His memory was a closed book, one she had no desire to reopen. Her peace was shattered by the sight of 5 riders emerging from the heat haze, their horses moving with the weary plod of men who had crossed a great distance. They didn't hesitate. At the broken crossroads, they turned onto the faint trail that led straight to her cabin, their purpose as clear as the dust cloud they raised. Ilara didn't reach for the rifle leaning by the door. She simply waited, her arms crossed, a solitary sentinel against the emptiness. The men reined in, their faces hard and etched with the toll of a long journey. They weren't outlaws. Their clothes were worn but decent, their bearing that of men on a specific, solemn errand. The leader, a man with a graying mustache and eyes that had seen too much sun, tipped his hat. "Ilara Kane?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "That depends on who's asking," she replied, her voice steady, betraying none of the unease coiling in her stomach. The man nodded slowly, as if her caution was expected. He didn't offer a name. Instead, he reached inside his coat, a move that made Ilara tense. But he pulled out not a weapon, but a long yellowed envelope, sealed with a blot of dark wax. It was crumpled and stained from its journey, but it was intact. "We come from a place called Ironstone," the man said, his voice a dry rasp. 3 weeks' ride from here. "We knew your father, Elias Kane." The name was a key turning in a lock she'd sealed long ago. A coldness that had nothing to do with the wind crept into her bones. "He's been dead for 10 years, she stated, a flat, final fact. The writer's expression didn't change. "Yes, ma'am, he is. But his debts ain't." He extended the letter. He told U.S. if anything were to happen to him, we were to bring this to you. Said you were the only one he could trust. Said you'd understand. Ilara made no move to take it. "I understand nothing about that man. You've wasted your ride." A flicker of impatience crossed the man's face. "It ain't that simple, miss. The debt he left behind. It ain't the kind you pay with money. He made a promise, a big one, to some very dangerous people. The kind of promise that gets inherited." His eyes held hers, and for the first time she saw a glint of fear in them. They're coming to collect. And if they can't find him, they'll come for his blood, for you. He thrust the letter toward her again, this time with an urgency that bordered on desperation. He said this letter would explain everything. It tells you what he found out there. And it tells you why we had to find you before they did. The 5 men sat on their horses waiting, their silence more pleading than any demand could be. They weren't just delivery boys. They were refugees fleeing a storm her father had summoned. And they had led it right to her doorstep with a hand that trembled. Slightly despite her best efforts, Ilara finally took the letter. The wax seal, imprinted with her father's crude attempt at a K, cracked under her thumb. The past hadn't just caught up to her. It had arrived with a warning, delivered by 5 strangers who looked at her not as a solution, but as their last hope. What kind of debt did Ilara's father leave that isn't paid with money? What dangerous promise did he make, and what did he find out in the West that was so important? Why are these 5 men so scared? The mystery is deep. Share your theories in the comments below. The cabin felt smaller with the 5 strangers inside, their presence sucking the air from the room. The leader, who introduced himself as Gideon, stood with his men by the door, giving her space but watching her every reaction. Ilara's fingers trembled as she unfolded the brittle pages filled with her father's familiar sprawling script. The letter wasn't an apology. It wasn't a farewell. It was a confession and a warning. "My dearest Ilara," it began, the term of endearment feeling like a slap after his long absence. "If you are reading this, then I have failed to make things right, and the darkness I unearthed is now at your door. I pray these men found you first. I left you and your mother for a reason, though I know it was a coward's reason. I heard a story, a legend of a valley called Ironstone, a place not on any map, where a man could find not just gold, but redemption." Ilara's eyes scanned faster, her heart thudding against her ribs. "I found it, but I found something else with it. The valley is real, the gold is real, but it is not for the taking. It is guarded, Ilara, not by men, but by something older. The land itself is alive with a presence. The old-timers in the mining camp, the ones who've been there since the beginning, they know. They worship it. They make offerings. They have a pact with it." A cold dread began to seep into her bones. Gideon and his men shifted uncomfortably, as if merely hearing the words spoken aloud was dangerous. "In my greed, in my desperation, to come back to you a rich man, I did not listen. I led a team deep into a sacred canyon, a place they forbade us from entering. We found the mother lode. We also woke something up. Men started disappearing. Their bodies were found days later, drained of color, with no mark on them but a look of pure terror on their faces. The camp blamed me. I was an outsider. I had broken the pact." Ilara looked up from the letter, her eyes finding Gideon's. His face was grim, confirming the horrific truth in her father's words. "The debt," she whispered. Gideon nodded slowly. "The pact, your father broke it. The presence. It demanded balance, a life for the disturbance. His life." He agreed. It was the only way to calm the storm he'd unleashed. Ilara's gaze dropped back to the letter, to the final shocking paragraph. "I have agreed to give my life to settle the debt. It is what I deserve. But the old ones, the guardians in the camp, they say the pact is deeper than a single life. They say the debt is now blood deep. It passes to my heir. To you, Ilara. They will come for you, to take you to Ironstone, to take my place in the pact, to become part of the offering to keep the peace. The 5 men with this letter. They are not your enemies. They are the ones who tried to protect me. They are running from the others. The ones who believe in the pact without question. The ones who are coming to collect you." The pages fluttered from Ilara's numb fingers onto the table. It was madness, a nightmare. Her father hadn't just left her with nothing. He had left her as a sacrificial lamb to appease some ancient horror he'd awakened in a forgotten valley. "The writers," she stammered, her voice hollow. "The ones coming to collect." Gideon's face was pale. "The enforcers. Men from the camp, zealots. They believe completely in the pact. They'll be here, maybe a day behind us, no more. They won't stop. They can't. They believe if the debt isn't paid with Cain blood, the wrath will fall on all of Ironstone. They will burn this world down to find you." Ilara stared at the 5 desperate men in her cabin. They hadn't brought a debt. They had brought a curse. Her father's final legacy wasn't gold or redemption. It was a death sentence, delivered by 5 frightened men who saw her not as a person, but as a token to be traded for their safety. The weight of it was crushing. She had spent a lifetime building walls to keep the past out. Now, the past wasn't just knocking. It was riding over the horizon with a mandate to drag her to hell. Ilara's father sold her to an ancient presence in a cursed valley to pay. For his sin, now fanatical enforcers are coming to take her. But what is the presence? A monster? A spirit? And can it even be reasoned with? Gideon and his men are scared. But are they allies or just shepherds leading her to slaughter? The danger is supernatural. What will she do? Comment your theories. The letter lay on the table between them, not just a piece of paper, but a live fuse burning down to an unimaginable explosion. The walls Ilara had built around her life felt paper thin, useless against the nightmare her father had summoned. You led them here, Ilara said, her voice low and accusing. She looked at Gideon, then at each of the other men. Their fear was real, but so was the threat they had brought to her doorstep. You didn't come to warn me. You came to bring the offering to them, to make it easy. Gideon flinched as if struck. No, ma'am, that's not it. Your father, he was a fool, but he wasn't evil. At the end, he regretted it all. He gave us this letter, and he told us to run, to find you, to give you a choice he never gave you. What choice? Ilara demanded, the words sharp with skepticism. To be sacrificed quickly or slowly. To fight, one of the other men, a younger one named Caleb, blurted out. He had a feverish intensity in his eyes, the presence. It's tied to the land, to the gold. The zealots, the enforcers, they think it's a god, but it's a parasite. It feeds on fear, on sacrifice. Your father thought his death would satisfy it. It didn't. It just made it hungrier. It wants more. It will always want more. Gideon shot Caleb a warning look, but the dam had broken. He's right, Gideon admitted, his shoulders slumping. The disappearances didn't stop after your father, after he was taken. They've gotten worse. The enforcers are rounding up outsiders, anyone they can blame, to feed it. They're not just coming for you to fulfill the pact. They're coming because you're a Cain, your bloodline. They think it's stronger, that it will satiate the thing for longer. The horror kept deepening, becoming more grotesque. She wasn't just a random sacrifice. She was a prime cut. You said fight, Ilara pressed, latching onto the only word that offered a glimmer of agency in this suffocating dread. How? How do you fight something like that? We don't know, Gideon said, his honesty brutal, but we know where it lives. We know the canyon. We know the mine shafts they use for their rituals. He swallowed hard. Your father, in his madness, he studied it. He left journals notes. He thought there was a way to break the cycle, to kill it. The enforcers burned most of it, but they might have missed something. He hid things. He leaned forward, his eyes pleading. The choice is this. You can wait here for the enforcers to come and take you to a fate worse than death. Or you can come with us, back to Ironstone. We can try to find your father's research. We can try to break this curse at its source. It's 1,000 to 1 shot, but it's a shot. It was insanity. To ride toward the very thing that wanted to devour her. To trust these terrified men who were clearly hiding more than they were. Telling Doc the decision was made for her. From the window, Caleb, who had been keeping watch, let out a sharp, hissed breath. Smoke, on the southern horizon, a lot of it. They all rushed to the window. In the far distance, a column of dark. Smoke rose into the twilight sky. It wasn't a campfire. It was a building. A homestead. The Miller place. One of the other riders muttered, his face ashen. That's on the direct route from the Crossroads. Gideon's face hardened into a mask of grim certainty. They're here. They're burning their way. To you, sending a message. They're not asking. They're taking. Ilara looked from the rising smoke to the 5 petrified men, to her father's damning letter. There was no choice. Staying was death. Going was probably death. But one path had a sliver of defiance in it. She turned and walked to the corner of the room, grabbing the rifle leaning by the door. She checked the load with practiced hands, then slung a bandolier of cartridges over her shoulder. Then "Don't wait for them to get to the message," she said, her voice cold and steady. All hesitation burned away by the fire on the horizon. "We ride, now." She was no longer Alara Kane, the woman beyond the crossroads. She was the heir to a curse, and she was going to meet it head on. They're riding straight into the heart of the nightmare. What did Elora's father discover in his research? A weapon? A weakness? And what aren't Gideon and his men telling her? The enforcers are already here, burning everything in their path. The hunt is on. What will they find first? Comment your predictions. They rode hard into the deepening night, leaving the comforting isolation of Alara's homestead behind. The glow of the distant fire was a brand on the horizon, a constant reminder of the ruthless fanaticism on their heels. Alara led them not along known trails, but through cuts and washes she'd learned from years of solitary roaming, trying to erase their trail. The 5 men followed her without question now. She was no longer just cargo. She was their guide into the wilderness and their only hope for a way out. The moon, a pale sliver, offered little light, turning the world into a landscape of ominous shadows. The urgency was a physical thing, a whip at their backs. They pushed their horses, the animals' flanks lathered and their breath pluming in the cold air. The first obstacle was the Snake River, swollen and angry with spring runoff. The usual. Crossing was a wide, shallow ford, but now it was a churning torrent of black water. "We'll never make it across tonight," one of the men, named Elias, said, his voice tight with fear. "We should find a place to hide, wait for dawn." "They'll find us," Gideon countered, his eyes scanning the dark water. "The enforcers know this land. They'll have scouts on both banks by morning. We cross now, or we're cornered." It was Alara who made the decision. "There's a spot downstream," she said, her voice cutting through the men's fear. "A narrows. The current is fiercer, but the crossing is shorter. The horses are strong. We can make it." She didn't wait for consensus. She turned her mare and urged her into the water. The shock of the cold was immediate, the current tugging powerfully at the horse's legs. For a terrifying moment, the animal struggled, losing its footing on the slick river rocks. Alara leaned forward, speaking in low, steady tones, coaxing the horse through the deepest part. Behind her, she heard the shouts of the men as they followed, the whinnies of frightened horses. They made it, one by one, dripping and shivering on the far bank. But the delay had cost them. As they regrouped, a sound carried on the wind from the direction they'd come. The distant but unmistakable baying of hounds. A new, more primal fear seized them. They hadn't just been followed. They were being tracked. "They have dogs?" Caleb asked, his voice rising in panic. "Not dogs," Gideon said, his face grim in the moonlight. "Wolves. They use timber wolves, raised from pups by the enforcers. They don't just track a scent, they hunt." The rest of the night was a blur of exhausted, fear-fueled movement. They rode until the horses were on the verge of collapse, then ran on foot, leading the trembling animals. The baying grew louder, then faded, then louder again. A terrifying game of cat and mouse across the vast prairie. Just before dawn, as the sky began to lighten to a dull gray, they found temporary refuge in a box canyon, its entrance hidden by a thicket of scrub oak. They were spent, their clothes torn from pushing through brush, their faces etched with a fatigue that went deeper than bone dot. It was here, huddled together for warmth, that Gideon finally broke. The relentless pursuit, the baying of the wolfhounds, had shattered his last reserves. "There's more," he whispered, his voice raw. He wouldn't meet Alara's eyes. "About your father. About why the enforcers want you so badly." Alara just watched him, too tired for anger. He didn't just wake the presence. Gideon said, the words tumbling out in a guilty rush. He communed with it. In his journals, he wrote that it spoke to him. It showed him things, visions. It promised him power, a kingdom under the mountain. That's why he was so willing to sacrifice himself. He thought he was becoming part of it. A god. He finally looked at her, his eyes filled with a terrible pity. The enforcers don't just think your blood will satiate it. They think you can control it. They believe the gift of vision, of communion, is in the bloodline. They're not bringing you to be a sacrifice. They're bringing you to be their new high priestess, to lead them. And if you refuse, he didn't need to finish. The baying of the wolves, closer now, said it all. Ilara stared into the dying embers of their small, hidden fire. Her father hadn't just been a fool. He had been a fanatic. And he had passed his madness down to her like a poisoned inheritance. They didn't want to kill her. They wanted to crown her. The truth is worse than anyone imagined. The enforcers want to force Ilara to become their priestess and control the ancient presence. What visions did her father see? And does this mean Ilara might actually have a connection to this thing? The Wolfhounds are getting closer. Can they escape, or will they have to make a stand? What happens next? Comment your theories. The weight of Gideon's revelation was heavier than the rifle in Ilara's hands. They didn't want her blood. They wanted her mind, her soul. The thought was a more profound violation than any physical threat. The baying of the Wolfhounds was a noose tightening around their makeshift sanctuary, a sound that promised not death, but a fate far worse. Dawn broke, not with hope, but with a pale, sickly light that seeped into the box canyon, illuminating their exhaustion and despair. There would be no more running. The horses were spent. The men were at the end of their strength. "They're here," Caleb whispered, peering through a gap in the scrub oak that hid the canyon entrance. Ilara moved beside him. Emerging from the morning mist were figures on horseback, silhouetted and ominous. And alongside them, loping with a terrifying fluid grace, were the wolves' massive, thick-furred beasts with eyes that glinted like chips of ice. They fanned out, surrounding the canyon, a silent, efficient killing circle. This was it. A last stand in a forgotten corner of nowhere. Gideon checked his revolver, his face a mask of grim resignation. We can't outrun them. We make our shots. Count. Take down as many as we can. It was a suicide pact, but Ilara's mind was racing, cutting through the fatigue and fear. Her father's journals, his research. He thought there was a way to break the cycle. He had studied the presence, communed with it. He believed it could be fought. That had to be the truth he hid, not the ramblings of a madman. It was the only thread of hope they had. "No," Ilara said, her voice cutting through the tense silence. All eyes turned to her. "We don't fight them. They'll take you." Gideon argued, his voice desperate. "Let them," Ilara said, a dangerous, reckless plan forming in her mind. It was 1,000 to 1 shot, just like Gideon had said. But it was the only one that didn't end with them all dead in this canyon. "They don't want me dead. They want me compliant. They'll take me to Ironstone, to the source." She looked at the 5 terrified men, her gaze fierce. "You said my father hid his research. Where? Exactly where?" Gideon stared at her, understanding dawning, followed by horror. "The old assay office, in the main camp." "But Ilara, you can't." "It's the only way," she interrupted. "You stay hidden. You survive. When they take me, you follow. You find his research. You find a way to break this. It's what my father would have wanted." She was invoking the ghost of the man who doomed her, twisting his legacy into a final desperate gamble. Before anyone could protest further, Ilara stepped out from behind the cover of the scrub oak into the open mouth of the canyon. She held her rifle loosely, not aiming it, but making sure the enforcers could see she was surrendering. The reaction was immediate. The wolves stopped their advance, lowering into a crouch. The riders reined in their horses. A man separated from the group, riding forward. He was tall, dressed in dark, homespun wool, his face severe and devoid of emotion. This was no fanatic. He was a cold, calculating zealot, a high enforcer. "Ilara Kane," he said, his voice flat, carrying easily in the still morning air. "The land calls for you." "I'm here," she replied, her voice steady, though her knees felt weak. "Take me to Ironstone. Leave these men alone. They are not part of this." The enforcer's eyes scanned the canyon behind her, but he seemed uninterested in the 5 fugitives. They were insignificant. She was the prize. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Their fate is no longer your concern. You have chosen the path of acceptance. The land is pleased." 2 riders broke off and trotted toward her. They did not roughhouse her. They simply took her rifle and gestured for her to walk. There was a terrifying reverence in their movements. They weren't capturing a prisoner. They were escorting a holy relic. As she was led away, she glanced back once at the box canyon. She saw a flicker of movement in the scrub, Gideon's pale, horrified face watching her go. She had just handed herself over to the enemy. She had placed all her faith in the hidden notes of a madman and 5 broken men, who may not even survive the day. The enforcer fell in beside her as they walked. "Your father saw the glory that awaits," he said, his tone almost conversational. "He lacked the strength to embrace it. You will not. The visions will show you the truth. You will lead us into a new age." Ilara said nothing. She kept her eyes on the horizon, on the path to Ironstone. She was walking into the lion's den, but for the first time, she wasn't a victim. She was a weapon, deliberately placed. Now she had to hope Gideon was sharp enough to pull the trigger. Ilara surrendered herself to save the others. Now a captive, she's being taken to the heart of the cursed valley. What will she discover about the presence? Can Gideon and his men actually find her father's research and decipher it in time? The most dangerous part of the journey begins. What will happen in Ironstone? Comment your predictions. The journey to Ironstone was a descent into another world. The air grew heavier, colder, as if they were riding into a pocket of perpetual twilight. The trees became gnarled and twisted, their branches like skeletal fingers clawing at a sky that seemed permanently overcast. The enforcers did not speak to her, their silence more unnerving than any threat. They moved with a grim purpose, their eyes constantly scanning the blighted landscape as if expecting an attack from the very rocks. When they finally crested a rise and looked down into the valley, Ilara's breath caught in her throat. Ironstone was not a town, it was a scar. A collection of dilapidated shacks and mine entrances dug into the sides of the bleak, treeless mountains. There was no laughter, no industry, no life. The few people moving between the buildings did so with slow, shuffling steps, their heads down, their faces etched with a deep communal exhaustion. It was a place that had had all hope mined out of it. They led her down the main and only street, toward the largest building, a 2-story structure that might have once been a saloon or a trading post. The sign above the door was so faded, it was unreadable. The townspeople stopped their shuffling to watch her pass. Their eyes were not hostile, but hollow, filled with a terrifying mix of fear and a desperate, hungry hope. They looked at her as if she were a rain cloud in an endless drought. She was taken inside the building, which was dimly lit by smoky oil lamps. The air smelled of damp earth, unwashed bodies, and a strange metallic tang that stuck to the back of her throat. The high enforcer finally spoke. "You will wait here. The land will sense you. It will prepare you." He left her in a small windowless room with a single cot and a chair. The door closed behind him, and she heard the heavy thud of a bolt being thrown. She was alone, but not really. She could feel it. A pressure, a tension, like a great weight settling over the entire valley. It was ancient, patient, and utterly alien. It was probing at the edges of her mind, curious. This was the presence. And it knew she was here. Hours passed. The light from under the door faded as dusk fell. Just as the silence and the psychic pressure were becoming unbearable, a different sound reached her, a faint, rhythmic scraping at the base of the wall behind her cot. Alara froze, listening. The scraping came again, followed by a muffled whisper. "Kane? You in there?" Gideon. Her heart leapt. She dropped to her knees, pressing her ear to the rough wooden planks. "Gideon, how did you—" "Old mine tunnel," he whispered back. His voice rushed intense. "Runs right under this building. We found it. We're in the assay office." Elora's hope surged. "Did you find it? His research?" A pause. Then, "Yeah, we found it." But his tone was all wrong. It was filled with a new kind of dread. "Elara, it's worse than we thought. The presence. It ain't some spirit. It's a mineral, a living ore. It grows in the mountain like a fungus. It feeds on thought, on fear, on life. The sacrifices, the rituals, they don't appease it. They feed it. They make it stronger." The pieces began to click into a horrifying new configuration. The drained bodies. The terror. It was being consumed. "The visions your father had," Gideon continued, his voice trembling. "They weren't gifts. They were an infection. The ore gets in your blood, in your mind, through the dust in the air, the water. It shows you what it wants you to see. Glory, power. It makes you want to serve it. It's changing you right now, just you being here." Alara felt a cold sweat break out on her skin. The pressure in her mind, the strange metallic taste, it was the ore. It was already inside her. "There's more," Gideon said, his whisper barely audible. "The research. Your father figured out the only way to kill it. It's not with guns or dynamite. You have to starve it. You have to sever its connection to the people. You have to break their belief. But he wrote that the ore fights back. It protects itself. It'll show you anything, make you believe anything, to stop you." The doorbolt suddenly screeched. Gideon's whispering ceased instantly. Alara scrambled back onto the cot as the door swung open. The High Enforcer stood there, but he was not alone. Beside him stood an old woman, her face a web of wrinkles, her eyes milky with cataracts. She pointed a bony, trembling finger directly at Alara's wall. "She speaks to the shadows," the old woman croaked. "The land is jealous. It does not like to share." They knew. They knew about Gideon. The presence had told them. The presence is a psychic living Owari that infects minds. Gideon found the research, but they've been discovered. How can Alara fight something that's already inside her, twisting her thoughts? The enforcers are coming for Gideon. Is there any way out? The stakes are higher than ever. What happens next? Comment your predictions. The old woman's accusation hung in the close metallic air like a death sentence. The High Enforcer's eyes, cold and devoid of humanity, shifted from Alara to the wall she had just been pressed against. He knew the presence, the living ore, that permeated this cursed place, had felt the intrusion, the whispered conspiracy, and had sung its warning through its blind oracle. Time seemed to stretch, then snap. "The unbelievers hide in the earth's wounds," the old woman rasped, her sightless eyes seeming to stare right through the floor. "They defile the sacred dark." The High Enforcer didn't shout. He didn't need to. He took a step into the room, his hand going to the knife at his belt. He would tear up the floorboards himself. He would drag Gideon and the others out of the tunnel and offer them to the mountain right here. Ilara's mind raced. The ore's influence, a static buzz at the edge of her consciousness, trying to feed her images of submission, of the power that awaited her if she just let it happen. But beneath that, a sharper, clearer thought emerged, a memory of her father's letter. The land itself is alive with a presence. It wasn't just alive. It was listening. She couldn't fight them physically, but she could fight them. On their own terms. As the enforcer knelt, his fingers searching for a gap in the floorboards, Alara did the last thing he expected. She threw herself to her knees before the old woman, not in supplication, but in a performance of frantic revelation. "Wait!" She cried out, her voice pitched high with a feigned or-induced ecstasy. "The land, it speaks to me. It doesn't want them down there." The enforcer froze, his head snapping up. The old woman tilted her head, a flicker of confusion on her wizened face. The presence itself seemed to pause, its attention focusing on this new, unexpected channel. It says their doubt is a poison." Alara continued, pouring every ounce of desperation into her performance. She pressed her palms against the cold dirt floor, as if receiving a vision. "It says their blood would be a taint, a corruption. It wants them gone, cast out from the valley, purged from its sight so their unbelief does not spoil the great offering." She was gambling everything. The research said the ore fed on belief. She was giving it a grander, more dramatic narrative. Why merely kill a few rats in the tunnel, when you could stage a grand exorcism? Why have a simple sacrifice when you could have a purification ritual that would strengthen the faith of every single person in Ironstone? She was appealing to the ore's vanity, to the enforcer's theatrical zealotry. The high enforcer slowly rose to his feet, his knife forgotten. He looked from Alara's seemingly transfigured face to the blind seer. The old woman was silent. For a long moment, her head cocked as if listening to a distant voice. Finally, she spoke. "The new vessel speaks true. The land's will is clear. The impurities must be flushed out, not consumed, expelled." The enforcer gave a sharp, accepting nod. The logic fit his fanaticism perfectly. He strode to the door and barked orders. To men outside, "Seal the lower tunnel exits. Drive the unbelievers out into the canyon. Let the land reject them." Alara remained on her knees, her heart hammering. She had done it. She had saved Gideon and the others from immediate slaughter. But she had also condemned them to be hunted in the open, driven into the wilderness with even more enforcers on their tail. And she was now deeper than ever in the lion's den, her fate irrevocably tied to the very thing she was trying to destroy. The ore's presence in her mind felt stronger now, a warm, approving hum. It liked her performance. It wanted an encore. Alara brilliantly manipulated the cult to save Gideon. But now he and his men are being driven out of the tunnels to be hunted. How can they possibly survive and still help her? And with the ore's influence growing stronger in Alara's mind, can she resist its visions and keep her own plan intact? The danger is now inside her head. What's the next move? Comment your predictions. The success of her gambit left a metallic taste of triumph in Alara's mouth that wasn't entirely her own. The presence, the living ore, hummed with approval inside her skull, a parasite mistaking its host's cunning for devotion. The high enforcer Silas now looked at her not as a prisoner, but as a nascent oracle. The blind seer had been led away, her function served. "The land speaks through you," Silas said, his voice devoid of its previous coldness, replaced by a fervent awe. "It has chosen its vessel early. You must learn to listen more deeply, to see what it wishes to show you." This was her chance, the only chance she might get. She had to weaponize their belief. Alara let her eyes go slightly unfocused, staring at the smoky air of the cramped room. It shows me fragments," she murmured, putting a tremor in her voice. "Light in the dark. Lines on paper. The old knowledge, my father's understanding, it is not lost. It is waiting for me." She pressed her fingertips to her temples, as if receiving a painful, glorious download. The maps. His journals. The land wants me to have them. To understand the full extent of its glory, to better serve. She was playing a deadly game. She was asking for the very research Gideon had found, the research that detailed how to kill the thing they worshipped. She was betting their fanaticism would override their caution, that their desire to indoctrinate her fully would make them hand over the keys to their own destruction. Silas's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. A sliver of his innate suspicion remained. The oar's influence was powerful, but not absolute. The old writings are dangerous for the uninitiated, he said carefully. They can be misunderstood. They led your father to doubt. Ilara met his gaze, letting the oar's energy fuel her performance, letting a flicker of its imagined power glow in her own eyes. And I led the unbelievers to the light of expulsion, did I not? She countered, her voice gaining a harder edge. The land does not fear its own truth. It wants me strong. Not an ignorant priestess, but a powerful queen. Would you deny it? It was the right button to push. Ambition, power, the very things that had likely seduced him. To be the enforcer of a mere priestess was one thing. To be the right hand of a queen was another. After a long, tense moment, he gave a single sharp nod. He believed. Or he wanted to believe enough to take the risk. Wait here, he commanded and left the room. He returned minutes later carrying a metal lockbox, its surface stained with dark, rusty patches Ilara didn't want to identify. He set it on the cot beside her. This is all that was saved. The rest was purified by fire. The land trusts you. See that you are worthy. He left her alone with it. With trembling hands, Ilara opened the box. Inside, carefully preserved, were her father's journals. And beneath them, a series of detailed hand-drawn maps of the mine shafts, far more complex than anything Gideon had described. Her father hadn't just been a victim. He'd been a cartographer of madness that she devoured. The journals first. The writings were chaotic, leaping from precise geological notes to feverish ramblings. He described the ore not as a fungus, but as a neural network, a vast, crystalline consciousness spread through the mountain, feeding on psychic energy. The sacrifices were a concentrated feast, but its steady diet was the low-grade fear and despair of the entire population of Ironstone. Their belief wasn't just faith. It was a nutrient. Then she found it, the key. Her father's disparate hypothesis. It is a circuit, he wrote, the script frantic. The people are the battery. The mine shafts are the wires. The central cavern, where the oldest growth is the heart. To break the circuit, you cannot just remove the battery. You must create a short, a surge of energy so opposed to its nature that it overloads the system. Not fear, not despair. The opposite, a single concentrated burst of hope. Ilara stared at the word. Hope. How could that be a weapon? She scrambled for the maps. Her father had marked a central cavern, deep in the mountain, accessible only through a treacherous, unstable shaft he'd labeled the artery. And next to it, he'd drawn a single, startling symbol. A tree with deep roots. Understanding dawned, terrifying and perfect. He wasn't talking about an emotion. He was talking about a physical thing. The one thing that represented life, growth, and defiance in this barren, poisoned place. The ancient, gnarled pine tree that grew alone on the ridge high above the town. The only tree for miles. The one everyone said was cursed because it wouldn't die. Its roots must tap into a deep water source, reaching down into the mountain's heart, right into the central cavern of the ore. Her father's plan was insane. It was brilliant. He proposed to pack the hollowed roots with blasting powder and create a surge of life-giving water and energy directly into the ore's heart, overloading its negative frequency with a shock of pure, unadulterated life. It was 1,000 to 1 shot. But it was a shot, and she was the only one who knew about it. Gideon and his men were out there, running for their lives, unaware of the real weapon. The weight of it all settled on her shoulders. She had to get to that tree. She had to finish what her father started. The door opened again. Silas stood there. Well, he asked, what does the land wish you to know? Ilara looked up from the maps, her face a mask of serene certainty forged in the fires of her father's madness. "It wishes me to see its heart," she said. "Take me to the central cavern." Ilara discovered her father's plan: blow up the ancient tree to flood the ore's heart with water and life energy. But she just asked the High Enforcer to take her right to the core of the danger. Is this part of her act, or a desperate move? Can she actually set the explosives under the Enforcers' noses? The finale is set. What will she do? Comment your predictions. Silas did not question her request. To him, a demand to see the heart was the ultimate sign of her conversion, a pilgrim seeking the altar. He led her from the cramped room, through the oppressive silence of the mining camp, and toward the gaping maw of the main mine entrance. The few townspeople they passed fell to their knees, not for Silas, but for her. The word had spread. The vessel was walking among them. The entrance to the mine was a black hole carved into the mountain. But as they descended, a change began to occur. The rough-hewn timber supports gave way to smooth, strangely organic-looking walls. And there was light. A faint, pulsating blue-green glow that emanated from the rock itself. Veins of the ore ran through the walls like alien circuitry, throbbing with a soft, rhythmic light. The air grew thick and heavy, the metallic taste so strong it was like breathing dust. Ilara could feel the presence here, not as a pressure, but as a physical thing, a vibration in her teeth, a hum in her bones. It was trying to soothe her, to show her beautiful swirling patterns behind her eyes. She saw visions of herself enthroned on a dais of crystalline light, worshipped by thousands. Her father smiling proudly at her side. The ore was offering her everything she had never wanted. She focused on the maps in her mind, on the rough sketch of the tree, on her father's desperate words, hope. The tunnel opened up abruptly, and Ilara stifled a gasp of genuine awe, which she quickly masked as religious fervor. They stood on a ledge overlooking a vast subterranean cavern. It was breathtakingly beautiful and utterly terrifying. The entire cavern was a geode of the living ore. Massive crystalline structures jutted from the floor and ceiling, glowing with that same ethereal light, pulsing in a slow, synchronous rhythm like a sleeping giant's heart. In the center of the cavern lay a still black pool, its surface reflecting the alien glow. This was the heart, the source. "It is magnificent," Ilara whispered, forcing the words out through the ore's psychic seduction. Silas nodded, his own face wrapped with devotion. "All that we are, we give to it." This was it, the place. Her father's theory was correct. The entire mountain was a network, and this was its nexus. But her plan was in ruins. She was surrounded by fanatics deep underground. She had no explosives, no way to reach the tree's roots from here. The brilliant plan was useless. Despair threatened to crush her. The ore sensed it, and the visions it fed her turned dark images of Gideon and his men being torn apart by wolves, of her own body dissolving into the black pool, becoming one with the presence forever. But then, she saw it. Across the cavern, partially obscured by a giant crystal formation, was another tunnel entrance. And carved crudely next to it, almost faded into the rock, was the same symbol from her father's map, the tree with deep roots. The artery her father hadn't proposed, flooding the cavern from above. He had found a way in from below. The tree's roots must have breached this secondary tunnel. "There," Ilara said, pointing a dramatic, trembling finger toward the symbol, playing the oracle once more. "The land calls me there, to the place of deepest connection. I must go alone." "To commune." Silas followed her gaze. A flicker of unease crossed his face. "That tunnel is unstable, forbidden. It is where the impurities are strongest." He meant it was where the ore's influence was weakest, where a person might still have their own thoughts. "All the more reason to purify it with my presence," Ilara insisted, layering her voice with an unwavering certainty she did not feel. "The land wishes it. Would you deny its heart? The religious logic was inescapable. After a tense moment, he relented, handing her a small lantern. "We will wait here. The land will protect you." Alara took the lantern, her heart hammering. She walked away from the ledge, toward the forbidden tunnel, feeling the weight of Silas's gaze on her back. With every step away from the central cavern, the psychic pressure lessened, the beautiful visions fading, leaving only the cold, desperate reality of her mission. The artery was narrow and descended sharply. The air grew damp, and the glowing veins of ore became fewer, replaced by wet, dark rock. And then she saw them. Thick, gnarled roots breaking through the ceiling and walls, pale and seeking in the lantern light. She was right beneath the tree, and there, tucked into a crevice where a massive root breached the wall, was a small, oilcloth-wrapped bundle, her father's final gift. With shaking hands, she pulled it free. Unwrapping it, she found everything she needed. A small, carefully packed bundle of blasting powder, a fuse, and a simple striker. He had planned to do this himself. He had gotten this far. A noise from behind her made her freeze. A soft scuff. Of a boot on stone, she turned, clutching the explosives to her chest. Silas stood at the entrance to the artery, his face a mask of devastating betrayal. The ore's connection might have been weaker here, but it was still strong enough. It had felt her intent. It had shown him the truth. "You lied," he whispered, his voice choked with a pain more profound than anger. "You corrupt everything." He drew his knife. The communion was over. The sacrifice was back on. Silas discovered her. Alara is trapped in a narrow tunnel with explosives in her hands, and a fanatic with a knife blocking the only exit. Can she fight her way out? Can she light the fuse in time? And where are Gideon and his men? The final confrontation is here. How does it end? Predict the epic finale. Silas lunged, his knife aimed for her heart, his face twisted with the rage of a true believer betrayed. Alara had no room to gee. She did the only thing she could. She threw the oilcloth-wrapped bundle of powder directly at his face. The move was so unexpected, so utterly without finesse, that it caught him off guard. He flinched, batting the bundle away with his knife arm. The package hit the tunnel wall and fell to the ground between them, the paper wrapping tearing open, spilling dark grains of powder onto the damp stone. The distraction bought her a single second. She didn't try to retrieve it. Instead, she grabbed the only weapon she had, the lantern. She swung it by the handle, smashing the glass reservoir against the wall beside her. Kerosene splashed across the rocky floor, the wick sputtering but still burning. Silas, recovering, stepped toward her, his boot coming down in the spreading fuel. He didn't seem to notice, his eyes fixed on her. "The land will have its offering," he snarled. "It's had enough," Alara breathed. She dropped to her knees, not in surrender, but to grab the still-burning lantern wick. She touched it. To the trail of spilled kerosene. Fire roared to life with a whoosh, racing across the floor, following the path of the fuel straight toward the spilled black powder and Silas's feet. Realization dawned in his eyes. A moment too late. He tried to jump back, but his boots were slick with fuel. The flame reached the powder. The explosion in the confined space wasn't the massive, mountain-shattering detonation she had planned. It was a sharp, concussive thump that felt like a giant's fist punching the air from her lungs. It threw her back against the tunnel wall. Silas was flung in the opposite direction. A ragged cry cut short. The world was reduced to ringing silence and choking dust. Alara pushed herself up, her ears screaming. The tunnel was still intact, but the walls near the blast were shattered. And through the new gaps in the rock, she saw them, thick, pale tree roots, now exposed and severed, gushing water into the tunnel. It was working. Not as planned, but it was working. The small blast had ruptured the root system. Icy, clean water from deep underground began to flood the narrow passage. Alara scrambled over the rubble. Silas lay motionless, half pinned by rocks. She didn't stop. She splashed through the rising water, back toward the heart of the cavern. Behind her, a groaning sound started, deep and seismic. The mountain was waking up to its injury. She burst out of the artery and into the massive cavern. The enforcers who had been waiting with Silas stared in shock, not at her, but at the water now, pouring from the tunnel mouth. The serene black pool in the cavern center began to churn. The beautiful, rhythmic pulsing of the crystalline ore began to stutter. The blue-green light flickered erratically like a dying heartbeat. A high-pitched, psychic shriek tore through Ilara's mind, not a sound, but a sensation of pure, agonized negation. The ore was rejecting the water, the life, the hope flooding its system. The enforcers fell to their knees, clutching their heads, screaming as the presence that had ruled their minds convulsed in its death throes. Ilara didn't wait to watch. She ran past the writhing figures through the tunnels, toward the fading light of the surface. The ground shook, and behind her, the glorious cavern of light collapsed into darkness and water forever. She stumbled out into the open air, gasping, just as a group of riders crested the ridge. Gideon and his men, battered but alive. They had survived the hunt. They watched in stunned silence as the ground settled and the last tremors faded. The oppressive silence that had hung over Ironstone was gone, replaced by the simple, clean sound of the wind. It was over. Weeks later, the survivors of Ironstone, freed from the ore's psychic prison, began the long process of dismantling their cursed home. Ilara stood with Gideon on the ridge, looking down at the valley. "What will you do now?" he asked. Ilara looked at the ancient, gnarled pine tree, still standing despite the explosion beneath it. It was a symbol no longer of a curse, but of resilience. "I'm going home," she said. But she knew she wasn't the same woman who had lived beyond the broken crossroads. She had carried her father's debt, and in paying it, had found her own freedom.